What if the smallest thing you ever did, something you forgot about before the week was even over, turned out to be the thing that changed someone's entire life? Not a grand gesture. Not a speech. Not money. 3 words. Written on a napkin. By a broke 19-year-old kid who had nothing left to give and gave it anyway. Tuesday morning. Milwaukee. A young man named Damon sits on a bench near the east entrance of campus with $3.50 in his pocket and 1 meal left for the day. Not the week. The day. A sandwich and a bag of chips from the corner store. That was breakfast. That was probably lunch. That was maybe dinner too, depending on how the next few hours went. He was 19. Working nights at a warehouse on the south side. Living in an apartment where the heat showed up when it felt like it and the hot water was basically a rumor. He unwrapped that sandwich right there on the bench, and that's when he saw her. She was sitting on the low wall across the street. Maybe 18, maybe younger, hard to tell. Thin in the way that said this wasn't new. Still in the way that said she had learned to be. She wasn't looking at him. She was looking at the food in his hands. And then, the second she realized she'd been caught looking, she looked away. Like she was training herself not to want it. Damon ate his sandwich. He went to class. She was there the next day. Same wall. Same stillness. Same eyes that found the food and then looked away before anyone could notice they had looked. Third day, his friend Terrence was with him. They had pooled what they had, $1.25 and $2.25, and bought 2 sandwiches from the cart near the library. That was it for both of them until payday. Terrence spotted her immediately. She said no. Damon said, I didn't say anything. Terrence said, you don't have to. I can see it on your face. D, listen to me. You've got 1 sandwich in 36 hours before you get paid. You cannot feed a stranger and yourself on 1 sandwich. This is not your problem. Now, here's the thing, Terrence wasn't wrong. Every single word he said was true. She's not going to remember you. She's not going to thank you. You're going to go hungry tonight and she's going to be right back on that wall tomorrow. Damon looked at his food. He looked at her. He stood up. Terrence said, "Man." Damon was already walking. He crossed the street knowing every word Terrence had said was accurate. He crossed it anyway. Not because he had found some better math. Not because he had convinced himself it would work out fine. He crossed it because he could not sit on that bench with food in his hands and watch someone go hungry and still recognize himself afterward. He stood in front of her. She looked up at him. Eyes sharp, proud, the kind of eyes that had made a decision a long time ago that they were not going to ask anyone for anything. He put half his sandwich on the wall beside her. She looked at it. Then at him. She said, I don't need your pity. Because I'm not offering any. He sat down on the wall a few feet away and said, casually, like it was nothing, I ordered too much. I can't finish it. She looked at the sandwich. She looked back at him. She knew he was lying. He knew she knew. Neither of them said a single word about it. She ate. He ate what was left of his half. They sat in complete silence for 8 minutes. 8 minutes of 2 people pretending nothing significant was happening, which was the only way anything significant could happen at all. Then he stood up, picked up his bag and went back to class. Terrence watched him sit back down without saying a word. Then he said, You're an idiot. Damon said, Proud. He went to class hungry. He did not regret it. Now here's where this story gets extraordinary. Because Damon didn't just do it that one time. He came back the next day. And the day after that. Every single day. Without exception. Without announcement. Without asking anything in return. Sometimes it was rice in a container from his apartment. Sometimes bread and peanut butter. Sometimes a real meal from the cafeteria on weeks when he'd picked up an extra warehouse shift and had actual money to spend. Once, on a week when the warehouse cut his hours and the corner store wouldn't extend his tab and his kitchen had nothing in it, it was a bag of chips. Just chips. That was it. That was all he had. He put them on the wall in front of her anyway. She looked at the bag. She looked at him. She said, and it wasn't a question, this is all you have, isn't it? He said, I had a big breakfast. And she almost smiled. It was the first time he had seen anything close to one. He filed it away without knowing why. The seasons changed around them. He showed up in the October cold. The November frost. The full Milwaukee winter, And if you've never been through a Milwaukee winter, let me tell you, the wind comes off that lake like it has a personal score to settle. He showed up when it was 31 degrees and the bench had ice on it. He showed up the morning after a warehouse shift that had gone until 4 in the morning, still in yesterday's clothes, with exactly enough energy left to cross a street. He always had something. Even when it wasn't much, it was always something. She noticed. Not by saying it, by being there before he arrived. Waiting instead of arriving after. Eating more slowly, like she'd stopped calculating whether this was the last time. She trusted the routine before she trusted him. And that was fine. He made the routine trustworthy. Every single day, he made sure it was. They started talking. Not deep things at first. The weather, which professors were actually worth the hour, the parts of Milwaukee that changed at night and the parts that didn't. Small things. Safe things. Then one afternoon, a Wednesday, the sky doing that particular Milwaukee gray, she said something quietly, almost to herself. My mom got remarried. Her new husband, he's just, some days there's just nothing at home. No food. Nothing. I never wanted anyone to know that. Damon didn't say I'm sorry. He didn't say that's terrible. He didn't press her for more. He just pushed the food a little closer to her and said, "No, what, you're just eating lunch." She looked at him for a long moment. Like she was checking whether the kindness came with a cost, the way most things did. It didn't. She ate. A week later, she told him her name. She said, "I'm Simone." He said, "Damon." She nodded, like it fit something she'd already suspected. It rained the following Friday. A real Milwaukee rain, cold and sideways. He found her under the narrow overhang of a closed shop 2 blocks from campus, trying to stay dry. He walked her to a covered spot near the campus canteen. Warm enough. Dry enough. They waited out the rain together. She was looking at her slippers. The sole on the left one was separating. She said, "My mother used to say something to me before everything changed." She said, "Never lose your dignity, even when you lose everything else." She said it carefully. Like she was handling something that could break. The last good thing she had from the woman her mother used to be. He didn't rush past it. He said, "She sounds like she was right." Simone looked at him. She said she was. Before she forgot it herself. They sat there while the rain ran off the overhang. Neither of them filling the silence because the silence was doing something that neither of them could have said out loud. It was enough. He bought her new slippers from the discount store on 3rd Street. $5. The last 5 he had until Friday. He put them on the wall without saying a single word about it. She looked at them. She looked at him. She put them on. She said, "You didn't have to do that." He said, "The old ones were going to cause problems." She said, "Damon." He said, "It's just slippers, Simone." He never told anyone. Not even Terrence. Here's something you need to understand about Simone. She was sharp. Sharper than she let most people see. The kind of intelligence that only surfaces when someone finally feels safe enough to stop hiding it. She had opinions about money, about systems, about the way power arranges itself quietly so you never notice it was arranged at all. She had read more than anyone Damon sat next to in actual class. She told him once, on a cold December afternoon, that she had wanted to study business. That she had a plan. That she had been building towards something before her mother's situation took the scaffolding down. He said, "Plans don't expire." She looked at him. He said, "You're still here, aren't you? You're still in school." She said, "Barely." He said, "Barely counts." She was quiet for a moment, then she asked him why he kept going. The shifts, the classes, all of it. He said, "Because my mother worked 2 jobs for 18 years to get me here. So I keep going." She said, "That's a good reason." "What's mine?" He said, "What's yours?" She looked at the wall they were sitting on. She said, "I don't want to disappear." He said, "You're not going to disappear." She said, "You don't know that." "But you're still here. That's evidence." She ate the rest of her food. He went to class. He thought about what she said for the rest of the week, about disappearing, and about what it meant that she was still fighting it. Then came a morning in the 2nd semester. February. Bitter, bone-deep cold. Damon came to campus with absolutely nothing. No food. No money. The warehouse paycheck hadn't cleared. He sat on the bench and looked at the wall across the street. He pulled a napkin from his pocket. He took a pen from his backpack. He wrote 3 words. He walked across the street and put the napkin on the wall in front of her. "You'll be okay." She looked at it. She looked at him. He said, "I'm sorry. I've got nothing today. I'll have something tomorrow." She didn't say anything immediately. She looked at the napkin. Then she picked it up, folded it carefully, like it was something that mattered, and put it in her pocket. She said, "Thank you, Damon." He went back to class. He forgot about the napkin before the week was out. Life kept moving. There was always something more urgent pressing from behind. He had no idea she would carry it for the next 11 years. The last Tuesday arrived without announcing itself, which is how the worst lasts always come. He brought rice and beans in a container. She ate. They talked about an economics exam. She was sharper in that conversation than most people he sat next to in actual class. Opinions about trade policy that were specific, informed, and original. He told her she should be in the room where those decisions got made someday. She said, "Maybe," and looked out at the street when she said it. Not dismissively. Thoughtfully. Like maybe was a real possibility she was turning over in her hands. He went back to class. He didn't know it was the last time. Wednesday, she wasn't there. He sat on the bench. Waited. Ate alone. Went to class. Tried it. The wall was empty. The week after empty. He started bringing food anyway, sitting for 20 minutes, waiting longer than made sense. He asked around. Nobody knew a girl named Simone. Nobody had noticed her the way he had noticed her, which told him something about how well she had learned to move through the world without being registered by it. 3 weeks. He stopped bringing extra. But he never stopped looking at that wall. Every single time he passed it on the way to class, on the way home, through the rest of that year and the next, he looked. Just for a second. The way you check a place where something used to be, even after you've accepted it's gone. There was one afternoon, about a month after she disappeared, when he found himself at the corner store buying 2 sandwiches without thinking about it. He was already at the counter before he caught himself. He stood there for a moment looking at the second one. Then he put it back. That happened twice more before it stopped happening. He never fully accepted it was over. That part stayed open. That was 11 years ago. Milwaukee. Present day. The van said Cole Plumbing Services on the side in blue letters, a little faded on the right where the afternoon sun hit it every day. There was a dent on the rear left panel. He kept meaning to get it fixed. Damon Cole was 30 years old. He had graduated from UW-Milwaukee with a business degree, transferred after community college, worked his way through, took 5 years instead of 4. After graduation, 8 months of applications that didn't call back, 4 months of interviews that chose someone else, 2 months of quiet free fall, and then he got his plumbing certification. Not because he had dreamed of it. Because he was good with his hands, the program was affordable, and a man named Mr. Greer in his building had taken a chance on him. 4 years later, Cole Plumbing Services was his. Honest. Reliable. His clients used that word, reliable, the way they meant it as a compliment, and he received it the way you receive a compliment that is true but not quite large enough. He was not bitter. He was not broken. He had just gotten quieter than he used to be. The kind of quiet that settles in when the version of yourself you liked best has been waiting a long time to be needed. He made coffee. Drank it standing at the counter. There was a photo of his mother on the wall. She was smiling in it, the way she smiled when she was making things look better than they were. He had that same smile. Didn't entirely mind. He rinsed the mug, picked up his tools, and went to work. The East Side job was an afternoon booking. Nice neighborhood. Old trees, long driveways, lawns cut with the precision of people who believe small things matter. He knocked. The door opened fast. A woman, already in her coat, phone in one hand, keys in the other, moving before the door was fully open. She said, "Kitchen sink. Rosa will show you." And she was already past him, headed for the car. Over her shoulder, "Lock up when you're done. Rosa has the key." The car backed out. Gone. Damon stood in the driveway for a moment. Shrugged. Went inside. Rosa was a small woman in her 50s who had clearly been managing that house for years and had the quiet authority of someone who had earned every square foot of it. She showed him the sink, degraded seal, connector that needed replacing. He had seen it 100 times. Fixed it in 38 minutes. Rosa offered water. He accepted. He wrote up the invoice. She signed it. He left. He didn't think about the woman in the driveway again. At roughly the same hour that Damon was drinking his morning coffee, Simone Price had been on a flight back to Milwaukee from a board meeting in Chicago. She had left Milwaukee 11 years ago with one bag and 43 borrowed dollars. The money came from a classmate named Priya who had seen something in Simone's face that afternoon and pressed it into her hand without being asked. Simone had said, "I don't know when I can pay you back." Priya had said, "Doesn't matter." Simone thought about Priya sometimes. The specific grace of help given without conditions, without performance. She thought about Damon too. She arrived at her grandmother's house in Memphis at 6 in the morning. Her grandmother had been waiting at the bus station in a 15-year-old Buick that started reliably only on the second try. Her grandmother looked at her for a long time when she got in. Then she said, "You're here now. That's what matters." Simone fell asleep before they reached the house. The first year was survival, plain and unglamorous. Hotel laundry 6 days a week. One-night class. Her grandmother's appointments, medications, and the quiet domestic management of a 71-year-old woman's life. She thought about the bench, the wall, the food, the boy who showed up every single day. She thought about the napkin. She had it in the bottom of her bag, folded inside a plastic sleeve she'd found in her grandmother's desk drawer. She protected it the way you protect things that can't be replaced. When the nights were worst, when her grandmother was hospitalized and the numbers didn't add up and the whole project of her life seemed to be collapsing faster than she could build it, she took it out and read it. 3 words. "You'll be okay." She built the first business on savings from 2 years of double shifts. Failed in year 2. She sat with the failure for 3 days. On the 4th day, she went back to the table. The second business almost worked. Closed after 18 months. She sat with that one for 2 days. On the 3rd, she went back to the table. The 3rd one held. By the morning she landed back in Milwaukee, Simone Price Enterprises had 300 employees, a building on East Wisconsin Avenue, and that folded napkin in a clear stand on her desk. Nobody who worked for her knew what it said. She never explained it. Some things don't need explaining. Some things just need to be where you can see them. 2 weeks after the East Side job. Saturday afternoon. Mayfair Mall. Damon was picking up a fitting for a Monday job. He got what he needed and headed back toward the parking garage. He stepped into the elevator, pressed level 3. The doors began to close. A hand came through the gap. The doors reopened. A woman stepped in, slightly out of breath, shopping bag in hand. She moved to the far side without looking at him and pressed level 2. The doors closed. Damon glanced at her the way you glance at people in elevators, brief, reflective, not really seeing. Then he looked again. He knew that face. Not from where. Just the face. The way you recognize someone when your memory has filed them under a context you can't immediately name while the rest of you goes on about its business. Then it came. The driveway. The East Side house. 2 weeks ago. He said, "Hey, I think I came to your place a couple weeks back. Kitchen sink." She looked at him. She said, "Oh, right. I'm so sorry, I was rushed. Did everything hold up okay?" He said, "Should be solid for years." She smiled, polite, appreciative, already half thinking about the next thing. She said, "Rosa said you were great." He said, "Rosa runs a tight ship. I was on my best behavior." She laughed at that. A real one. Quick and unplanned. The elevator reached level 2. The doors opened. She didn't move immediately. She said, "I never got your name, actually." He said, "Damon. Damon Cole." She nodded and reached for her phone. She said, "Let me grab your number, in case anything comes up." He gave it to her. She typed it in. She said, "And should I save it as Damon, or do you go by something else?" He said, "Damon's fine. Some people just call me Day. Either works." She stopped typing. Her thumb was still on the screen. Completely still. Like the message hadn't reached her hand yet. She didn't move. The elevator doors were open. Neither of them was walking through them. He watched something happen in her face. Not gradually. Not in stages. All at once. like a wall coming down that had been standing for 11 years. She looked up from the phone. She looked at him. And this time she was not looking at the plumber who fixed her sink or the man she had met in the elevator. She was looking at something further back, measuring the face in front of her against a memory, finding the match, and then not knowing what to do with the fact that it was real. Her voice came out lower than she intended. She said, "Did you go to Milwaukee Community College?" Something locked up in Damon's chest. A physical thing, not a thought. His body understood before his mind did. He said, "Yeah." Class of 2016. She said, "There was a bench near the east entrance." He stopped breathing. He didn't know he had stopped until he started again. She said, "And a wall across the street." She said it like she was describing a place she had visited in her mind so many times the memory had worn grooves in her. Neither of them spoke. The elevator doors had been opened for 30 seconds. They were still standing inside it. She said, "You used to bring food every day." She said, "You told me you ordered too much." Something broke open in the space between them. He said, "Simone." The word came out of him differently than words usually did. Not chosen. Just there. She nodded. Her eyes were full. Her hand was holding the elevator door open like she needed to hold something, like the rest of her wasn't entirely reliable right now. She said, Can we sit somewhere for a minute?" They found a coffee shop on the ground floor. Corner table. Away from everyone. She sat across from him and put her phone face down. She looked at her hands. Then she looked at him. She said, "I need you to know before anything else, it was not a choice." "What happened?" He said, "What happened?" She said, "My mother's husband." It escalated past the point where I could stay. My grandmother called one afternoon and said, "Come now." Not soon. I had 4 hours. I packed what I could and got on a bus. She said, "I didn't have your last name. I didn't have your number. We were just Damon and Simone." I went back to that wall in my mind 1,000 times trying to figure out how I could have found you, and there was no way. I had nothing. He said, "How long were you gone?" She said, 3 years in Memphis. My grandmother got sick. I took care of her, worked 2 jobs, took night classes. When she passed, I came back to Milwaukee. Finished my degree at UWM and started building. He said, "What did you build?" She said, "Come to my office on Monday. There are things I need to show you. And things I should have told you a long time ago." She wrote the address on a napkin and slid it across the table. He picked it up. He thought, without intending to, about another napkin. 11 years ago. 3 words. He put it in his pocket. He drove home through Milwaukee wondering who she had become and whether he was ready for the answer. Monday morning. East Wisconsin Avenue. He stood in the parking lot looking at the building before going in. Glass, steel. 14 floors. A name cut into the facade. Simone Price Enterprises. He stood there for a long moment. He thought about the wall. The worn slippers. The bag of chips that was all he had one day. A girl who never begged. Who just watched and looked away and waited. He thought, this is who she became. Then he went inside. Simone came down herself, different from them all. Composed. Precise. She moved through the lobby like she had built every square foot of it, which was closer to true than it might appear. She walked him to the elevator and filled in the outline on the way up. 300 employees. Started with a $4,000 church loan and a folding table in her grandmother's living room in Memphis. First business failed in year 2. Second almost worked. Third took hold. 8 years of growing it. He said, 7.5 years for all of this? She said, 7.5. I'm precise about it. He almost smiled. The elevator opened on the 11th floor. Milwaukee was below them. The skyline, the lake, the streets he had been driving for years, from a completely different angle. She walked him to her office. He sat down. On her desk, among all the things that said power and structure and achievement, there was one personal item. Folded. In a clear stand. He couldn't read it from where he was sitting. She sat across from him and did not ease into it. She said, "For years ago, I was expanding into facility management. I needed a reliable plumber for 3 commercial properties. I asked my operations manager to find someone in Milwaukee, clean record, Shows up when they say they will. He was watching her. She said he came back with a name. Cole Plumbing Services, Milwaukee. He showed me the business profile. The pause. She said there was a photo. Damon said nothing. She said I knew immediately. I sat at my desk for 20 minutes. Then I called him back and said, give them the contracts. She said, Simone. She said 3 buildings. 8 months of work. Invoices paid in 2 weeks, every time. You never knew. He was very still. She said 2 years ago, in March, you were behind on the van financing. 11 days before repossession. He said, how do you know about that? She said, I had someone make 3 months of payments. You probably thought it was a bank error. He said, I thought it was a bank error. She said, it was me. He stood up, walked to the window, stood there with his back to her, looking out at the city. He said, how long? She said, 4 years. He said, last year. The company trying to take my accounts. She said, Midwest Commercial Services. 4 of your biggest clients were about to switch. I had them redirected. He turned around. He said, why didn't you just call me? For years ago, when you saw the profile, why didn't you just pick up the phone? She said, because I didn't know if I had the right to. Because I'd been gone for 11 years and I left without a word. Because I didn't know if a phone call could undo that. And because I wanted to pay what I owed before I said anything. I wanted to have something real in my hands before I knocked on that door. He looked at her. He said, Simone, I gave you sandwiches. You didn't. She picked up the small folded piece of paper from the stand on her desk. She held it out. She said, do you remember this? He crossed the room and took it from her. He unfolded it. His own handwriting. From 11 years ago. The ink had bled slightly at the edges, the way cheap pens do in February cold. 3 words. You'll be okay. He stared at it. And then he remembered, not gradually, but suddenly and completely. The February morning. The paycheck that didn't clear. The bench. The napkin. Because it was all he had. Writing 3 words like they were a placeholder for everything he couldn't give that day. He had forgotten about it by the following week. She said, February 14th. He looked up. She said, I know the date. On the night the first business failed and I was sitting alone at a table with nothing left, I took that out. When the second one closed. When the bank said no. When I didn't know how one more day was possible. She said, 3 words. Every time. She said, you fed my body every day. You showed up when you had almost nothing. You bought me slippers and never mentioned it once. Her voice dropped. She said, but this, she looked at the napkin in his hands, this is what I built on. Not the food. 3 words that cost you nothing and gave me everything. The office was completely quiet. He looked at the 3 words in his own handwriting. Words he had written in 30 seconds and forgotten in a week. Words she had carried for 11 years, through every failure, every starting over, every morning when one more day seemed impossible. He couldn't speak. She said, do you understand what I'm telling you? You didn't just feed me. You made me believe I was worth feeding. And that is not something you can put a number on. He folded the napkin, held it back out to her. She shook her head. She said, I had a copy made. He put it in his shirt pocket. A long silence. Not empty. The kind that only exists between people who have just understood something that cannot be unsaid. He said, what do you want me to do with all of this? She said, there's something I need to know first. She told him to come back Thursday. She wanted to introduce him to someone before anything moved forward. A young man named Jordan. 22. Milwaukee Community College. Working nights at a distribution center, taking 12 credits, skipping meals. She said, he's been coming to the building looking for work. I just want you to talk to him. Tell him whatever you would have wanted someone to tell you at 22. She said, that's all. She did not tell him she would be watching. She did not tell him she had been watching Jordan for 6 weeks, had first seen him at a bus stop on North 3rd Street in February, eating a granola bar slowly in a warehouse uniform, with the specific stillness of someone who had learned to carry themselves carefully when carrying anything at all was hard. She had thought, I know exactly what that looks like. She had already decided to help him. But first she needed to know whether the man she was about to give everything to was still the person she had known at 19, or whether 11 years of hard living had buried the thing she was counting on. That question had no answer, except one. She had to watch. Thursday morning. Jordan was in the lobby when Damon arrived. 22, Milwaukee. That particular stillness that comes from being tired in a way that sleep doesn't fully fix. But he had ironed his shirt, and that told Damon everything about the kind of effort being made. Proud. The quiet kind. The kind you have to earn. They talked. Jordan was careful at first. The schedule, the nights, the way the credits and the shifts left almost nothing. Then something loosened and he started talking more directly. Damon said, "What do you want to do after the degree?" Jordan said, "Run something. Doesn't matter what kind. Something that's mine." Damon said, "Why does it have to be yours?" Jordan said, "Because nobody runs something they don't own with the same care. You can tell the difference every time." Damon looked at him. He said, "How old are you again?" Jordan said, 22. Damon said, "Don't lose that thinking." Jordan said, "What do you do when you're running out of runway? When you've done everything right and it's still not moving?" Damon said, "You find one more day. You don't look at the whole road. You look at what's right in front of you. One more day. Then one more after that." Jordan nodded slowly. He said, "Is that what you did?" Damon said, "Every day for 11 years. A moment of silence between them. Then Damon said, "Have you eaten today?" Jordan's hands stayed folded on the table. He didn't answer immediately. That pause, that specific pause, was the whole answer. Damon stood up. He said, "Come on." He walked Jordan to the building cafeteria, picked up a tray, added enough for two without making it a ceremony, paid, and carried it to a table by the window. Jordan sat across from him. Damon set the food down. He said, "I ordered too much." He didn't plan to say it that way. It came out of him without permission. The same 4 words. The same casual delivery. The same complete absence of performance. He didn't even hear himself say them. But across the cafeteria, near the door, Simone did. She had been standing there for 12 minutes with her coffee going cold in her hand. She watched Damon pay without making it a gesture. She watched him lean forward when Jordan talked, actually listening, not just waiting. She watched him say, "I ordered too much," like it was the most natural sentence in the world. And then she watched him say, a few minutes later, completely unprompted, "You're going to be okay." Said it the way you say something true. Not to comfort. Not to perform. Because you believe it and the other person needs to know you believe it. Jordan looked up. Damon said, "I mean it. You're going to be okay." Simone looked at the cold coffee in her hand. She had her answer. She walked back upstairs, picked up the phone, and called her assistant. She said, "Full company meeting. 3 o'clock. Everyone." She called Damon back to her office at 2. She said, "I was in the cafeteria." He said, "I saw you on the way out." She said, "You saw me?" He said, "About 10 minutes in." She said, "And you kept going anyway." He said, "Simone. The kid was hungry." She looked at him for a long moment. She said, "You never lost it." He said, "Some days I did." "You lost the belief that it mattered. But you never lost the instinct. I just watched you feed a 22-year-old boy the exact same way a 19-year-old you fed me, and you didn't even notice you were doing it." He was quiet. She said, "Did I pass?" He said it before she could. She laughed, surprised, genuine. She said, "You more than passed." She told him about the expansion. Facility management across Wisconsin. Commercial properties, schools, office buildings. A plumbing and maintenance partner she could trust completely. She was offering Cole Plumbing Services the anchor contract. Enough work for 7 people, enough stability to build something real. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I can't just accept something this size because of..." She said, "Because of what?" He said, "Because of sandwiches. I can't let that be why." She said, "It's not why. It's the reason I looked twice at the profile photo. That's different. The reason you're getting this contract is that you are the most dependable person I have ever done business with, and you didn't even know I was watching." He said, "That doesn't make this feel smaller." She said, "It shouldn't feel smaller. It should feel like what it is." She said, "Damon, you gave me everything when you had nothing. I am giving you something now that I have everything to give. This is not charity. I don't do charity. This is the most overdue invoice in the history of Milwaukee, and I am finally in a position to pay it. He looked at the napkin still in his shirt pocket. He said, I wrote 3 words on a napkin and forgot about it in a week. She said, and I built 11 years on them. He said, that's not a fair trade. It's not. It's better. He sat with that for a moment. Then he reached across the desk. She shook his hand. She called the company meeting at 3. All 3 floors. 300 people in the main hall on the 6th, laptops, coffee mugs, the particular low-grade uncertainty of a full company meeting called with 2 hours' notice. Damon stood at the front beside her. He had found out this was happening approximately 30 seconds ago in the elevator when she said we're going to the main hall, and he had looked at her, and she had looked back with an expression that made it clear the conversation about whether this was a good idea was not going to happen. He stood there now in front of 300 employees. Not entirely sure what was coming. She told the whole story. She started at the bench near the east entrance of Milwaukee Community College, and she didn't rush a single moment of it. The wall across the street. The girl who wouldn't beg. The boy who showed up every day with whatever he had, rice, bread, once just a bag of chips placed on a wall without apology or explanation. Some people in the room were smiling. Some weren't sure yet whether to. The slippers from the discount store that appeared one day and were never mentioned. The February morning when he had nothing at all and came anyway and wrote 3 words on a napkin. She said, I have kept that napkin for 11 years. In every office I have ever had. I have read it on the worst days. I have carried it through every failure and every time I had to start over. She said, this man fed me when he was hungry himself. He showed up every single day when he had almost nothing to show up with. He never told a single person. He never asked me for anything. And he never, not for one moment, made me feel like I was less than because I needed help. The room was completely still. She said, I have built this company on many things. The people in this room. Hard work. Starting over when things failed. The pause. But if you want to know the foundation, the thing underneath all of it, it is 3 words written on a napkin by a 19-year-old boy who had nothing else to give. And gave it anyway. She looked at Damon. He looked back at her. He was standing on the 14th floor of a building in Milwaukee in front of 300 people, thinking about a bench outside a community college and a wall across the street and a girl sitting on it with the kind of stillness that comes from learning to take up as little space as possible. He had just wanted her not to go hungry. That was all. That was all it had ever been. And here, this room, these people, these 300 jobs in a city that needed them, this was everything that had grown from that. She said, today, I am officially welcoming Cole Plumbing Services as the anchor facilities partner for Simone Price Enterprises. One person started clapping. Then the room. He sat in the van outside the building and didn't start the engine. He sat there while the afternoon moved around East Wisconsin Avenue. Then he called his mother. She picked up on the second ring. She heard it, something different in the single syllable. Something she had been waiting years to hear. She said, what happened, baby? He said, something good. Something really, really good. She went quiet. Then, before he had said another word, she started crying. He said, Ma, let me tell you. He told her all of it. The wall. The food. The slippers. The napkin. The 11 years of not knowing. The driveway. The elevator. The coffee shop. The office. The 3 words he had written and forgotten. She didn't say anything until he was done. Then she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, I told you. She said, I told you. The Damon I raised does not quit. I have been saying that to you for years and you never quite believed me. He said, I believe you now. She said, good. Things find good people, baby. Not always fast. Not always on your schedule. But they find them. He said, I had a good teacher. She said, you were the teacher, Damon. You just didn't know it yet. He sat in the van for a long time after they hung up. The afternoon light was catching the dent on the rear left panel. This week he was getting that fixed. This week. No more putting it off. 6 months later, Cole Plumbing Services had 7 employees. The new van had no dent. The letters were crisp and dark blue. Damon's office was 3 rooms on West Capitol Drive. Small, real work. 6 people who counted on the schedule he kept. On his desk was a frame. Not an award. A piece of paper behind glass. A replica made at a print shop on Fond du Lac Avenue. The original would always be Simone's. 3 words in his own handwriting. "You'll be okay." He had put it there the first day Jordan came by. That same week, Jordan stood in the doorway and saw the frame. He said, "What does that say?" Damon said, "Come read it." Jordan came in. Stood in front of the desk. "Read the 3 words." Looked at Damon. Damon said, "Someone wrote that for me once. On a day when they had nothing else to give." Jordan said, "Did it help?" Damon said, "More than they ever knew. More than I ever told them." Jordan looked at the frame for a long moment. He said, "What do you do with that? With something someone gave you that you can't pay back?" Damon said, "You don't pay it back. You pay it forward." Jordan nodded slowly. The way you nod when something lands in you and you know it's going to stay. He said, "Thank you, Damon. For everything." Damon said, "I ordered too much." Jordan laughed. Shook his hand. Terrence came by that same afternoon to drop off paperwork. He stopped in the doorway when he saw the frame. He said, "What is that?" Damon said, "Something I wrote 11 years ago that I completely forgot about." Terrence came in. Stood in front of it. He said, "3 words." Damon said, "3 words." Terrence said, "What do they mean?" Damon looked at the frame for a long moment. Then he looked at Terrence. He said, "Ask me Thursday." Terrence studied him. Something in Damon's face made him decide not to push it. He set down the paperwork. He said, "I'll see you Thursday." He left. Damon sat alone in the office. On his desk, the frame. 3 words in his own handwriting from 11 years ago. Outside the window, Milwaukee. The city he had driven through every day for 11 years. The streets. The skyline that looked different from the 14th floor of a building on East Wisconsin Avenue than it did from the cab of a work van. He thought about a boy with $3.50 crossing a street. He thought about a girl folding a napkin and putting it in her pocket. He thought, "I wrote those words and forgot them before the week was out." He thought, "She carried them for 11 years. He opened the next file on his desk. He got back to work. "Before you go, I need you to sit with a question." Simone helped Damon quietly for 4 years before he ever walked into her building. She gave him contracts, covered his van payments, protected his client base, all without a word, all without asking for acknowledgement. Some people say she should have found him sooner. That she had the means, and letting him struggle for 4 more years while she watched from a distance was its own kind of cost, however well-intentioned. Others say she repaid him the exact same way he gave. Quietly. Without announcement. Without needing credit. That the method of her repayment was the most honest tribute she could have paid to who he was. And then there's a third question, one that nobody in that building could answer cleanly. Whether the test she ran, watching him with Jordan, measuring him without telling him he was being measured, was something a person had the right to do. Even with 11 years of gratitude behind it. Even with the best intentions. That question doesn't have one answer. It has yours. Think about that. Think about the napkins in your own life. The 3-word moments you gave and forgot. The ones you received and kept. Because someone out there might be carrying something you wrote off in a week. And someone you're carrying right now might not even know you're still holding it. Pay it forward. That's the whole thing. That's all of it. If this story stayed with you, and I genuinely hope it did, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not because an algorithm needs it. Because they do. Hit that subscribe button, because there are more stories like this one every single week, and you do not want to miss what's coming next. See you in the next one.